That's fine. You can leave it.
Good. All right, I'll let the people.
As long as that's what's going on, I'll do.
Well, good evening, everybody. I want to thank you for coming out for the first Westford Climate Action neighbor to neighbor event. This is the first in the series of neighbor to neighbor events where we hope to talk about things like heat pumps. Maybe we'll do electric cars, solar panels, battery backup with solar panels, or who and Sustainability Committee, Heat Smart Alliance, which is a nonprofit group. Tom will tell you more about that later, and sustainability, our sustainability coordinator, Sue Thomas. So, started here. Yeah.
Westford Climate Action would
go
love
ahead.
to know who's here, and so we're passing around this clipboard. If you could sign your email and name, that'd be great. And if you want to get on our mailing list, just that thing.
E-tech support. Doesn't go. What's next? You got move to the next slide. My tech support.
That'll come in.
So tonight,
See if the arrow,
which one?
the arrow works now.
Okay, thanks. So tonight we're going to talk, we'll first, as I did our introduction already, and Tom Teller is going to give you the basics of heat pumps. Need this myself. I'm going to, after he's finished with that, we're going to talk about working with Mass Save to from your energy assessment, free energy assessment, to the application for rebate. Then we'll have some homeowner experiences, some people that have already put in heat pumps in their experience with them. I'm one of them. I just put one in my home in February. Tom has put in his home, and we have some other guests here that will tell you about their heat pump experience. So, Tom.
Good evening. My name is Tom Teller, and this evening I'm representing the Heat Smart Alliance, which I'll talk more about in a minute to acquaint you with it. The Heat Smart Alliance is a nonprofit. It's an all-volunteer organization whose mission, as you can see on the screen, is basically to promote heat pumps for heating and cooling, primarily residential. Although we do have some of our folks who support small commercial, often work with churches and that kind of stuff. The technology is the same, but the particulars are different, you know, in the commercial space. So heat pumps are excellent choices for heating and cooling, obviously, and for domestic hot water, which is, you know, not as often thought about. We now have, you know, membership in the Heat Smart Alliance is, as of tonight, it's knocking on the door of 100, and we have 43 communities who have Heat Smart representation, so we can offer the full palette of services in those in those cities and towns, and Westford is one of those. So our approach is to educate. That's the kind of thing that we're doing tonight. Coach, and then collaborate with other folks who are engaged in the same work. Important caveat, we are officially and rigorously agnostic when it comes to brands of equipment and particular installers, and we accept no support from either manufacturers or installers.
Next slide.
Sure, we're local representatives.
All right.
We can show it on your shirt.
Yeah, sounds good. Tell me when next slide, and I'll do it.
Next slide, Jerry.
There you go.
Okay. So the question is why heat pumps? That's a high content slide. You can move on. Okay, this is why.
We are not seeing the slides. We are seeing two PowerPoint windows and a browser window behind it.
No, he's there.
We'll fix that. Sorry.
This is the breakdown of in New England energy use. As you can see, the largest single contributor to energy use in New England is transportation, all forms of transportation. But residential is in second place, a close second place. And of course, in town of Westford, the percentage of residential contribution to energy use is higher than that.
Should be better.
Should be.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
We see it now. Thanks.
Okay. Now, if you break out the residential, and now we have the
Now this is working again, right? There we go.
we're both Mac guys, and so
Okay.
there we go.
right.
Okay. If you break out the home energy use, heating and cooling is the largest contributor to home energy use by a lot. Hot water is second, clothes drying third, and then the rest is in the middle there. So if you look at that, all of the orange section of that pie chart can be handled by heat pumps. And
What's in the other 20? That can't be handled.
mostly computers. No, I mean, all the other stuff, cooking is a contributor to it, refrigerators, yeah, and so forth.
Next.
Yes. So this is our obligatory slide on a path to decarbonization, which is something Heat Smart Alliance is very committed to, and by your attendance tonight, I presume you are too. The first step, and it's an important step not to overlook, is to weatherize your home. It does not make sense. The best approach is not to install the heat pumps and then tighten the home. What makes the most sense is to tighten the home first, air sealing and good insulation, and that will reduce the demand on the systems that are used to heat and cool your home and make it much more ready for that, so that they can work successfully. Then electrify, which basically means to replace fossil fuel heating systems, fossil fuel systems for hot water with heat pumps. And then the third step is shift to renewable energy. Now, even at the present time, and I have some slides about this later, if you switch from fossil fuel to heat pumps, with the content of the energy grid the way that it is now, by state mandate, about 60%, a little over 60% of the electricity that is going to the grid is from renewable sources. They're not all great new renewable sources. In the town of Westford, we know that our trash goes to a facility in Andover, which contributes renewable, but not arguably zero carbon or clean electrical power. And that's part of the contribution to that 62%. And the state mandate for what the state calls class 1 renewables which is basically solar, hydro, wind, is by mandate, it's directed to increase 2 or 3% a year until by 2030, it's going to be at 40%. So the grid is getting more green. However, we can accelerate that process by selecting where our power is coming from. And so that's the choice we advocate. Next. So what's a heat pump? A refrigerator is a heat pump. A heat pump is a device that moves heat from one area to another area. So we're not creating heat. When your furnace turns on or your boiler turns on, you're burning fossil fuels to generate heat, which is then circulated through your home and however your home is set up. The heat pump doesn't make any heat. It just moves it. And consistently, it moves it from the cooler place to the warmer place. So in the wintertime, where do we want to move the heat? Where do we want to move the cool? You know, we want to take heat out of the cold outside air and put it in the house to keep us warm. How is that possible if it's -10 as it was for a couple of nights last winter? Well, at -10 degrees Fahrenheit, there's still a lot of heat. You know, it's not close to absolute zero, right? So there's a lot of heat out there. And so we just capture some of that heat and move it to the inside of the home. In the summertime, when it's warm in the house and we want to move it outside, then we pump it the other way. And so an air conditioner and a refrigerator are very similar to a heat pump, except that heat pump is reversible. You can cause it to run in either direction. So you move the heat from one place to another, depending on the needs of the season. And the big users, the easy jobs are home heating and cooling. That's very widespread at this point. Water heating for your domestic hot water needs. Clothes drying. Those are not widely available, but they're becoming more widely available. Probably the closest cousin we have to that right now are condensation dryers, which use heat exchangers to remove the moisture from the drum, you know, where your clothes are rotating around, and condense it, and then that goes down the drain. They're not free of heat, but they're low heat, and they're not as efficient as heat pumps, but they're more efficient than a traditional high heat dryer. And pool heating. I've not had call for it myself, but it can be done. Next year. And so here's the graphic on the right is supposed to say better than I did why a heat pump works. And that's because you're taking energy that the sun is providing to us for free, not necessarily sunlight. I mean, it's not like solar photovoltaic, but the heat that is around us, even on the coldest winter's days, and we're able to move that in. And the electricity that takes the machine to run is just the pumping machinery, if you will, that causes that to happen. Before we move on, does anybody know the typical efficiency of an oil burner? Thermodynamic efficiency for either a boiler or a furnace. Well, no, it's low and lower, really, but anybody know what typical is? A little better than that. Typically, they're around 80 to 83% efficient. That means if you put, you know, a kilowatt of energy into the furnace in the form of fuel oil, you get about 0.8 of a kilowatt of energy in the form of heat out of the device. How about a gas furnace or gas boil? It's higher than that. 95. Around 95 for, especially if you have a more modern, fancy condensing gas unit. then we can get up to about 95%. Anybody want to hazard a guess on a run-of-the-mill cold climate heat pump, its efficiency? Nope. Actually, 100% is electric resistance heat, which we all know that's not that smart. I mean, it's not that cheap, but that's the standard. That's where what makes you put a kilowatt in, you get a kilowatt hour out. A typical cold climate heat pump is about 350% efficient. How is that? Well, that's because we're putting in 1 unit of electricity, getting 2 units of energy from the outdoors and moving it into our home. And so efficiencies in heat pump world, we call it coefficient of performance of 3.5 or higher are typically achieved. Next slide. Let's go one more. Okay, benefits of heat pumps in Massachusetts, substantial reduction in greenhouse gas. That's important. Next. Energy cost savings. Now, the most expensive fuels of fossil fuels are fuel oil, number 2, home heating oil, and propane. And you can save substantial amounts of money by using heat pumps in place of those 2 heating fuels. Very significant with electric baseboards. Next. Oh, wow, they didn't mention gas.
Yeah.
And that's honestly because right now, gas is more economical than heat pumps because of the way that our utility rates are in the Northeast. The gases actually still drives a lot of our electricity. About 40% of Massachusetts electricity is generated from natural gas. And so electricity is more expensive, even with a high efficiency heat pump, than high efficiency gas furnace or boiler. Money wise, safer home. Yep. And this is important. The yellow sawtooth curve represents the way that furnaces and boilers work in our homes. We all know that it's nice. You can turn it on in the morning, right? And if the heat comes on, oh yeah, it's great. Warms the house up very quickly, hits its set point and shuts off. And then heat drops over a period of time until it hits the low threshold, and then it comes back on. So the heat is cycling constantly, which we've come to accept and is usually not annoying or obnoxious, but still it's overheating and then cooling, then overheating and then cooling. Heat pumps work best by maintaining a temperature. They cannot bring the temperature of your home up as quickly as a gas furnace or an oil furnace, but they will bring it up slowly, but they can maintain it very well. Now, for most of my life, in my home, our home, probably in yours, at night, what do? You turn the thermostat down, right? Because who wants to be making lots of heat when you're trying to sleep? So, you know, you may turn it down instead of having our comfortable daytime high that we had before we got heat pumps of say 62. we turn it to 52 at night.
We were really cold.
Yeah, right. Heat pumps don't like that. And we officially do not recommend using setbacks with heat pumps. Pick the temperature and keep it. Some people dial it back 3-4 degrees for the home is slightly cooler at night. But if you turn it way back, then in the morning, the heat pump comes on and tries to warm your house up. It's not quick at doing that. And you're working in the most adverse conditions of the day in terms of heat pump because the outside temperatures are the lowest. And so your little machine has to pedal harder to move that heat back inside the home. And so we don't recommend using setbacks. Set it and forget it. And I can even do that. Next. So how much emissions reduction? So this is for a typical 2,000 square foot home. I don't know what a typical 2,000 square foot home is.
Not my house.
Yeah, most of us live in atypical homes, right? I've been coaching now for about a year and a half. I've done 25 homes in Westford. I gotta tell you, every one is different. In terms of just the way it's set up, how it's laid out, what their systems are, and what could work for them in terms of a heat pump. But a 2,000 square foot home with typical insulation, typical windows and so forth. The most efficient in terms of emissions, the most emission reductions can be achieved with a ground source heat pump. Now, most of my conversation has been about air source heat pump, where you're moving heat from outside air to inside air, or the reverse, depending on the season. A ground source heat pump, its big appeal is that the heat is exchanged with the ground, which maintains a relatively level temperature below the frost line year round. And so instead of pumping against a very steep temperature gradient, the gradient is very small. So why doesn't everybody put in a ground source heat pump? It's an excellent question. No, because they are 3 to 4 times as expensive. And they do chew up a bit of real estate. In New England, virtually all ground source heat pumps use vertical bores. And for planning purposes, the sort of the starting point is you have to figure 350 feet of vertical bore per heating or cooling time. And so for a typical 2,000 square foot house, you're probably talking about something on the order of 4 tons. So that means you need 2 700-foot bores to service that. And it's the drilling that's the most important and costly part of that. They're very good, very good. Cheaper to operate, very good, much more expensive to acquire. Second is an air source heat pump. And as you can see, you can reduce the emissions quite a bit from that compared to any of the fossil fuels. Why is baseboard electric lower than propane and lower than fuel oil?
Using renewables, even though you're using electricity.
Even a lot of the electricity comes from natural gas, which is less than that. You still have a substantial amount of renewables in it. And so you're doing better than you would be with the other fuels. And the worst is the most common heating fuel in New England. Number 2 home heating fuel.
Diesel. Next.
Yep. It's an important point. If you have the opportunity to, and here in Westford we do, how many of you know about WestfordCAT? WestfordCAT.
POP.
WestfordCAT. Westford has an electrical aggregation program that you can join in with your other neighbors and purchase that electricity. And at present, you can opt to go with the default rate, which is the state mandate, currently 24% plus 10%, or you can go plus 50% or plus 100%. And so if you're still taking your power from National Grid, then you can still, in net terms, purchase only renewable to supply the electricity to your home. And if that happens, then those approach 0. The 2 green bars approach 0. Next. Okay, next slide. So what you need for a heat pump, or what solution is going to work best for you, depends a lot on what you have in your home now. If your home has a hydronic system, which is just fancy talk for saying you're running hot water or even steam in some cases through pipes, distributed from baseboards, radiators, and we still have some homes that are equipped with radiators. here in Westford. Radiant floors, which are really yummy. They're very, very comfortable. But those are hydronic systems, and so at the heart of that is going to be a boiler. It may be oil fired, it may be gas fired, but it's going to be a boiler. Next, please. The other option,
The wrong way.
no, back,
Oh, yeah,
there you go.
I can do that.
Stay there.
Yeah, there you go.
Is a forced air system where you have a furnace, maybe oil fired, it may be gas fired. You have a furnace which is going to distribute the heat through your home through air circulation, through some sort of supply vents and return vents to keep the air circulating. So those are the choices. So what works? Next. If you have a hydronic system now, then the approach of choice is to use a ductless system called mini splits, or if you hit just one more, multi splits, if you want to be really fancy. A mini split is an outside unit matched to an inside unit. A multi split is an outside unit matched to more than one inside unit. And that's a typical arrangement. But these do not depend on the current distribution system, which essentially cannot be used. There are air to water heat pumps that can work just like another air source heat pump that heat water instead of air. But in New England, those are generally not even considered unless you do have radiant floor heating, because the temperature of the water that a heat pump can produce is much less than the temperature of the water that a boiler will produce. And so your baseboards or your radiators are all undersized because it's only going to be warm water circulating through that system rather than hot water. And then next. There is such a thing called a compact ducted unit that can be used to feed some rooms, and it's a different type of inside head for the multi-split, but that it can work with some existing ductwork. Your fossil fuel system can provide backup in extreme conditions. Full confession, we switched to heat pumps. We have 3 years now with our heat pumps. We kept our oil furnace because at the time I didn't have coaching from Heat Smart Alliance. I didn't even know about it. And so I just sort of did the best I could. Took quite a bit of work to do that. But in the end, I was pretty confident that the heat pumps could support all the heating requirements of our home. And I was very confident they could support all the cooling. But I didn't have experience with it. So we left the oil in place. Our 275 gallon oil tank, which now 3 years later has 273 gallons of oil in it, because we haven't run the furnace in 3 years. No, I run it for about 10 minutes once a month, just to make sure that that rascal will come on if I have some sort of casualty with the heat pump system and I need to go to the backup. A lot of people do. Some heroes don't.
Right? I took mine out.
Took theirs out.
No backup.
That's right. Next. The other thing for central systems, if you have ductwork and the ductwork is serviceable and sufficient, is to go with a central system. It can either be a partial electrification option, and a lot of people do this. They pair a gas furnace with the inside unit, the air handler from the heat pump. So most of the time you're running off the heat pump, but if the temperatures are extreme or you have some problem with the system, you can run the gas to back it up. So the outside unit looks like a central air conditioning unit. Next. You can go complete electrification with a ducted system. And that means that the outside unit will be connected to a full air handler, heat pump, the inside part of the heat pump, And all of the air circulating your home will come from the heat pump air handler rather than your furnace. For ground source heat pumps, those currently really only work with a central ducted system and complete electrification. They don't play well with backup systems.
Next.
Yeah, that's said the same thing I did. Now let's talk about a little bit ground source and heat air source. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. The incentives are larger, 50% larger for ground source. Again, they're 3 to 4 times the cost.
Yes.
But the incentives are larger. They are much higher, more efficient, have much higher efficiency, and there's nothing above ground, nothing on the outside of the home. Those are all underground pipes that run into the home. And it's something that can be a concern is refrigerant leaks. Refrigerant of the sort that are used in heat pumps, just like in air conditioners and refrigerators. Those are not good for the environment. And so refrigerant leaks are not a good thing. Those can be minimized by good quality installations, but with a ground source heat pump, they're minimized greater because there are very few field fittings. Everything's pretty much done at the factory. Air source, much lower initial cost. That's the big appeal. There's no disturbance to the landscaping because you don't have to dig those bores and the big trenches to connect those big bores to your house. So there's very little disturbance to the soil, requires very little space, and we have more ductless options currently. And oil heat pump options for domestic hot water. Domestic hot water is a big user of energy in our homes. I'll show you our 3-year average of what it's contributed to our home. But it's a big user. And if we could make that use less, then we would save energy, save power, and it would be a good thing for all. Heat pump water heaters is a self-contained unit. The heat pump sits on top of the water heater. The water heater, the bottom of it looks like any other hot water tank. But it's how the water is heated differs. Full confession, we do not have a heat pump water heater. And I mean, the ugly truth is that our 1700s house with a hand-dug cellar is not tall enough to accommodate the height of a heat pump water heater. So we have an engineering team working on that.
Getting a bigger
Very
holes, right?
small engineering team.
Keep going.
Yep,
It's really.
and cost. Now, these are annual heating costs. And again, for our typical 2,000 square foot home, this does not include the install cost. And those are so variable, they change so much with a particular installation that one round number is going to be wrong. You just don't know whether it's wrong high or wrong low for your particular home. But the operating costs are very predictable. So ground source heat pump is the cheapest to keep a New England home warm or cool in the summer. Natural gas comes in second, air source heat pump third in terms of annual operating costs. And as you can see, it's about 50% more than a ground source heat pump in terms of annual operating costs. Fuel oil, propane, or baseboard electric. Whoa. Because the electricity is very expensive. Now, this is for Westford. So the prices in this are based on Westford Pop Gold. That means the 100% renewable option available from the Westford Pop Electric Aggregation Program here in town. And those are actual figures. The natural gas is based on National Grid average for the most recent period that I could access. And the delivered fuel costs are from last winter. Average delivered fuel costs in this area was $4.81 a gallon. So you may have done better than that, maybe not as good, but that's the average. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute.
It costs more to run an air source heat pump than it costs to run that.
Yes. Because the price of the electricity is more than the price of the natural gas per equivalent unit. So
That changes.
that changes. And with last winter's natural gas prices, they didn't percolate to the retail market as much as they hit the energy markets. So last winter's electric rates for basic service for National Grid was 34 cents per kilowatt hour. That was way high. So, yes.
Taking into account the decrease that they've already announced of 21% on National Grid's electric rate.
Yeah, the 21% decrease from a, oh my God, high is still not cheap. But the rates have been published for the next period of time. And the rate schedule is also changing because they're trying to make the swings between summer rates and winter rates a little bit less. Winter electricity is a lot more expensive than summer electricity. So they're splitting that up. They're making sure that January falls in one period, and February and the other period, those are the two highest cost months. And so the rates have already been announced that will be effective from November 1st, when the new schedule goes in place, until it's either June 30th or July 31st. Normally, those only go to March. So they're trying to bring the schedule around to the new schedule that's been mandated by.
Westford pop rates are unchanging,
What's that?
but Westford pop rates don't change.
They do not. That's right. That's out there in the world pricing.
And the air source, you said for the heat, you said heating and cooling. Does that number include cooling?
Yes.
Can you repeat this question?
Yeah, I said that air source heat pumps include heating and cooling, that these numbers include both ends of it. And the answer to that is yes. The cost of cooling is a relatively minor cost compared to the cost of heating.
No,
So
in comparison to natural gas, you get no cooling out of it.
Well, there are natural gas systems, air conditioning systems, they're uncommon. But they are out there, but it does include that.
But I mean, that doesn't.
That doesn't.
No.
No.
Okay, thanks.
We're moving on.
Yep.
Okay.
Financial incentives. So the first is rebates available from Mass Save, which is a not-for-profit semi-governmental organization that is funded by the investor-owned utilities like National Grid. So part of your rates that you pay to National Grid go to support the work of Mass Save. And if you install heat pumps, then you can get either 10,000 for an air source or 15,000 for a ground source heat pump for a whole house conversion. That means if you've sized the system and the system has been designed to provide 100% of your heating needs and cooling needs. Now, the whole home rebates have special requirements. And so what I'll say there is, number one, they're complicated. Number two, they're changing rapidly. So right now, to qualify for a whole home rebate is a more complex qualification process than happened, for example, when I put in our system or when Jerry put in his system. Yes.
How do people receive the rebates?
I'm gonna go through those steps. After this, I will tell you beginning to end.
How they come through.
Yep.
Next. If it's a partial home, meaning you don't have the system that's designed and engineered to supply 100% of the heating and cooling needs of the home, then you are eligible still for a partial home heat pump. And the difference is that you get a rate per ton of heating and cooling. A ton of heating and cooling is 12,000 BTUs. A typical 2,000 square foot home that none of us live in will typically require on the order of about 4 tons. And so if you put a 4-ton system in, then you're eligible for $5,000 rebate rather than $10,000 for a whole home air source heat pump rebate. So there's significant incentive to size your system to be able to supply 100% of your needs. And the $50,000, the heat loan, you get 0 interest heat loan for 7 years. And it's for the net cost of the system. How much you have to write a check for to have the system installed, less rebates that you have qualified for. But you can now include the cost of panel upgrades. It's not uncommon to require an upgrade to your electrical service. If you have 100 amp service now, then it would be reasonable to expect that you're going to need it to increase that service if you move to electric heating and cooling with a heat pump. If you have 200 amp service, then that probably will be sufficient. That's sort of the break over. Next.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
We upgraded our panel to include a charger in the driveway. Was this, if you wanted to upgrade your panel for the heat pump, it could also potentially do that.
Yeah.
So it would be the same loan for 2 purposes, if you were thinking of an EV
The
car.
panel upgrades are covered by the heat loan. They're eligible for the heat loan so that you can get a 0 interest. There's some other benefits that are out there for income eligible. Those are again complicated. I won't go through those. In addition to the state money through Mass Save, there's also money provided for these conversions through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed into law last August. And the basic tax credit depends on your tax situation. Consult your tax professional, 30% on a ground source heat pump. So that's significant. A ground source heat pump, we're talking about on the order of $60,000 to install a ground source. So 30% of that adds up to something substantial. And it's the same rate, but up to $2,000 for air source and up to $2,000 for a heat pump water heater through the IRA. Again, there are some income-based rules that are coming out. They're not yet published. So they're going to be great. And just as soon as the government starts working again, then we'll probably find out about them. I wasn't going to talk about politics, but yeah, the particulars have not yet been published. And so those are considered preliminary.
Next.
Yep.
There you go.
There you go. Financial analysis. Look at the first cost difference between what you have now and what you're looking at. You need to consider the cost of the heat pump versus conventional equipment. By the way, if your furnace is on its last legs, this is an excellent time to think about converting to a heat pump, because then you don't have to spend $10,000 to replace your furnace or your boiler. You can go straight for the good stuff. But consider the cost of that. Next. Include the incentives, obviously, that we just talked about. Those are significant reductions to your net. Next. And I would also urge you to consider assigning a price to carbon reduction. But we haven't successfully done that as a country, but there's certain, I expect that several people in the home find, in the audience tonight, find value in carbon reduction. If we can monetize that, then that should be considered as part of the equation. And then the value of the comfort improvements. I've not spoken to anybody who has made the conversion who hasn't said that their home is much more comfortable now than before.
Yeah. Nice.
Then we need to accept the uncertainties about future energy costs. Now, as a future seminar, we'll talk about if we put in solar, you're going to have a pretty big solar array to pay for to be able to supply sufficient electricity for your heat pumps. But you can certainly knock down the difference for that, or even community solar. And one more, and I think that's it. So your action plan. Here's what we recommend, the steps you take. Next. Convert to a heat pump when? Best thing is when the current system is aging. And for aging in furnace and boiler world, they're saying anything over 15 years is on borrowed time. And for water heating, it's much less than that. And water heaters, what wears out is the tank itself. But, you know, they have a shorter life span. Next. Important slide, right? The wrong time to be thinking about, I think I'm gonna put in heat pumps, is a cold January night when your furnace just rolled over and died. Yeah, that's not gonna work too well. Planning horizons right now from when folks go to get bids, which comes along fairly early in the process, but is not the first in the process, until they can have a system in their home, is typically on the order of about 4 months right now. So that's the kind of planning horizon that we're looking at. Other than that. Adding air conditioning to a home that doesn't have it. Right? Three. There we go. If you're planning an addition or renovation, or if you're building a new home. And that's obviously the time that you want to install that. And the building codes are changing so that there are significant incentives to electrify your heating and cooling, and significant disincentives under the new building codes if you choose not to electrify your heating and cooling.
That's statewide. That's statewide.
That's statewide. Yep, and that's Massachusetts. So first thing to do, get informed. heatsmartalliance.org. That's our website. There's a lot of information on the website that you can pull down and get yourself informed. Go. Second, because remember, we want to weatherize before we update the heating and cooling, is to get a no-cost audit from Mass Save. As a national grid community, you call them up and you say, I want a home energy assessment, home energy audit. It means the same thing. And they come out and they look at your home and they make recommendations about what work you should do, air sealing or insulation. And a lot of that work will qualify for substantial incentives from Mass Save to actually perform the work. Yes.
Mass Save and National Grid.
National Grid and the other investor-owned utilities in Massachusetts fund Mass Save. So Mass Save is a state level NGO, non-governmental organization. Yep.
And it's free. The audit's
And it's free. Yep.
You got installation.
Oh, it's light bulb.
Light bulb.
Yeah, they're free.
They don't do the light bulbs anymore. Instead, they give you completely useless power strips.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I hate that.
Yeah, but the insulation is definitely worthwhile. Yes, sir.
Yeah, actually, I think you do the home energy assessment before you go to.
I'm gonna go a little steps next.
Yep. He's going to talk about that aspect of it. Third, get advice from somebody who knows a bit more than you do. For the town of Westford, you're eligible for free coaching from a handsome, distinguished, highly knowledgeable. Okay, from me, but there's an upside probably in there. Or you can pay commercial companies who will come and do that kind of coaching service for a fee. Generally on the order of $250 for the initial advice. And then if you want them to review bids, it's another $250 on top of that.
You do that? The bid, reviewing the bid?
That's all part of the Home Heat Smart Alliance program, yes.
For
And
free.
so, yes, I do review bids with you. Again, we're agnostic. You know, we don't say get this brand rather than that brand. We don't say go to this installer rather than the other installer, but we can give you some guidance of installers that we're knowledgeable about. And something else that's built into it. If an installer comes out and says, I want you to give, a lot of people buy the big brands. No, you want to get this. It's Mel's heat pump. Works great. Mel stands behind it. We can, and we do look up on the list of qualifying equipment to make sure that that equipment is qualified for the Mass Save programs. It's on their qualified equipment list, and it's also certified by NEAT, Northeast Energy Partners, as a cold climate heat pump. You know, back in the olden days, people thought about heat pumps as for shoulder seasons, you know, down to maybe 38, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Our system is rated to 100% capacity to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and it will operate down in the mid-negative teens. And that's just where they tell you that it's going to happen. But the cold climate heat pumps work. And you know where heat pumps are even more popular than they are in New England? In the Arctic. Yeah. Oh, it's true. If you're talking, Norway and Finland have very high install rates for heat pumps. And a lot of people think they're colder than New England.
Well, Guido, I need to wrap it up. It's 8 o'clock.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Jerry's saying I've talked too much.
Okay,
I think that's it.
so we're going to, I'm gonna go over the steps, which are what I went through, or went through to, install the heat pump that I have. So as soon as he switches, slideshows here.
Terry, you should make that
This
black text next time.
Yes, ma'am. No, that's not it. That is next. Oops, keep going. Right there. Okay, so there's a lot on here, but so the first thing you need to do is call Mass Save. This is if you're seeking a rebate for your system. Now, I got my $10,000 rebate. Took them 5 months, but I got it. So call Mass Save, and literally you'll actually be talking to a human being. So, and if you can't remember that, if you do masssave.com, that number will appear there as well. So if you want to apply for a heat loan, make sure you ask details. Remember that 0% heat loan that Tom talked about? Ask at the time that you call details about that heat loan. So, you know, as he said, there's 0% interest heat loans are available for the net cost of the qualifying work after the rebate. And the maximum loan amount is going to vary. So again, that's why you talk to the Mass Save actual human being. At this point, it's time for you to start call heat pump contractors for estimates. Now, the Heat Smart Alliance has their website has some suggestions for qualified heat pump installers. You might look at those, or check with your neighbors or whoever you'd like to pick somebody at that. And we recommend, of course, at least 3 to look at. And also the Mass Save website has a list of approved contractors as well. So Heat Smart is like, and he's told you about that already, that they can assign a volunteer coach to help you go through that process. And you can use a paid service, which is what Tom went over. That can cost like, up to $500. So after you get the audit, after you call, they will assign an auditor to you. Now that could be, they use a number of companies. In my case, it was Clear Results, they call them. And I think I was able to get from when I called Mass Save to when the auditor came out was maybe 3 weeks, but that could vary. But that's an important first step. You have to get that done if you're seeking rebates. You have to get the energy assessment. So the auditor, they're going to come to your home. They're going to do a few tests, check the amount of insulation you have in your attic, check the amount of insulation that you have in walls, check the basement. And then they will supply, once they finish that audit, that takes a couple of hours, and at your home, they will come to your home. short time later, they're gonna supply you with full audit results. They're gonna, in my case, they were emailed to me. So I could look at those audit results and they make recommendations. They say, well, in my case, I needed to bring my attic insulation up to the current code, and that involved about another, I can't remember now, it was about another 12 inches of insulation over what I already had. So, if those audit results are going to require weatherization, that is added insulation. So the audit in my case, the clear result people said, use this insulation company to do that. Now, there's going to be a cost associated with that, but Mass Save pays 70% of that cost. So in my case, I think I had to pay about $400. That was my cost out of, I can't remember now, it was something like 3,000. It was quite a large amount of money. So now in my case, the audit said, use this particular company to do the insulation. I didn't want that company, so I said, I don't want to use them. So he said, well, if you go into the Mass Save website, there's a list of approved insulation contractors. So you have to do that. You need to pick one. Pick one of those contractors. Maybe your neighbor can tell you that somebody that they used, or in some cases, or Heat Smart may be able to help there. But you need to choose from that list of their approved contractors. And Mass Save, like it says, pays 70 to 100% of those insulation costs. You need to, at the time, once you've agreed on an insulation contractor, you have to pay a small deposit up front. Once the work is done, they'll ask you to pay the balance. At this point, you need to, once that weatherization is complete in your home, and that's to get that rebate, that weatherization must be complete before you install a heat pump. I had a little problem with that. You want to make sure the weatherization must be complete before you do that. Very important step.
You could repeat this question for the people online, but you could be doing other stuff at the same time. I mean, you could be
Yes.
contacting a Heat
Yes.
Smart coach.
Yes.
Could be.
There are many, like, was asked about, you could be doing a lot of stuff, as well, while you're waiting for, the weatherization to be done. You can be evaluating your quotes. You can be, getting quote coaching. There's other things you can do. So once all that's done, you're happy with a contractor, schedule your heat pump install after that weatherization is complete. As I say, that's very important to do it that way. Next steps along the way, schedule that heat pump system installation. The heat pump system, and the contractors know this, that the heat pump that they tell that your contractor recommends on your quote must be on a list that Mass Save qualified equipment, and that is on their website. It's a little hard to figure out. There's where coaching really helps, because they can dig down through this long list of numbers and make sure that the heat pump that contractor has recommended is on that list of approved heat pumps. You want a rebate, it has to be on that list. One of those things. The heat pump installer, by the way, your heat pump installer, there really is, especially if you're doing electrical work and you're doing in this heat pump install, that really requires permits from our building department. So talk to your installer about that and say, are you getting permits for this? Ask. If you want to do it by the book, they need to get permits. Probably 2 of them, electrical as well as building. You also, at this point, may need to upgrade your electrical panel, as Tom already In my case, I had a 100 amp electrical panel. That wasn't enough. I went to a 200. And the heat pump installer had an electrician that they worked with. That was an additional cost. I agreed on that. I now have a 200 amp service in the house. So the applying for the rebate, that can be done online. And by the way, I was a little confused about this. I called the person that did my audit. In fact, I emailed them actually, and I was asked them about the process, and they helped me with that. So that's another place that can help. Your auditor will kind of help you with the process if you have questions. So that heat pump rebate can be done online. There's a whole heat pump verification form that has to be, you can fill part of it out online, then you've got to print it out, and then you have to get signatures. You have to get a signature, your signature, plus the signature of the installer saying that they have completed the installation. At the end of all that process, you've got your heat pump in the house, it's working. Again, this is for the rebate process. In my case, I had 2 inspectors. So I was called. I had one inspector from Mass Save, and the other inspector was from the National Grid Gas Company. I don't know what, but anyway, but apparently Tom tells me that isn't necessarily the case. They don't always do inspections, but in my case, I had 2 inspectors come out. Once those 2 inspectors come out, in my case, and they were happy with what was there, then they will put in the paperwork that said you were approved for your rebate. So in my case, once the rebate was approved, and there is a hotline that you can call and ask about with Mass Save to ask about what's the status for your rebate. Has it been approved? Has it not been approved? Or when was it approved? So that then that's the baseline that for the wait time. And in my case, it took 4 months. So, but in 4 months, I had a check for $10,000. Okay. Next one. So now on top of that, the heat pump installation, this is with the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to be applying for a $2,000 tax credit. So that means my rebate will actually be, in effect, $12,000. The new electrical panel installation that I had done, I have a separate receipt for that. That is qualified for a 30% of the cost of that, up to $600. So there's another, and those can be stacked tax credits.
Terry, how much did your electrical panel cost?
Quite a bit. But and if you get a heat pump water heater, that can be 30% of the cost, up to $2,000. And by the way, when you get a heat pump through Mass Save, immediately when it's bought, I forget, it's like almost an $800. It's a $800 subtraction of the cost of the heat pump when your installer purchases the heat pump and brings it to your home. So they are actually, so the cost of it is reduced right up front. That's the way the rebates work for that in the state. You don't have to apply for a rebate, it's automatic. So.
Is that a change?
What's that?
You have to go.
That was, I don't know when that came in, but I know that's what it is now. So there is a rebate, but installer, the installer ends up with, well, it just means, let's say the heat pump costs $2,000. Knock $800 off of that, the installer is going to buy that heat pump from his supplier for $1,200.
A footnote that we need to make on that, and that is that it's eligible at the wholesale level. That money doesn't come to you, that goes to the installer. And it has not been rare for the installers to not mention that. And so it's good to know about that. It's actually $750. And so you should be seeing a $750 reduction off the retail cost of that unit. Should be what they're billing.
And I talked to I talked to a plumber, a couple of plumbers about this, and they didn't know about that. They said, well, you apply for the rebate. I said, no, I don't. You apply for the rebate, and I sent them the link and the exact wording on the Mass Save website as to how that rebate works. I don't apply for it, you do. So they don't even know.
So your installer is the one that has to apply for it?
They don't apply for it. They just get it. Like I say, when they go to a wholesaler and get it, like I say, if it was $2,000, that instant rebate is applied. So they are going to be paying less than that. That's how that works.
We did it.
How do you verify that that's
Huh?
what's going on?
We did that a couple years ago and it worked, as you said. It should.
Okay. All right, so now it's a
How do
point
you
where
verify that that's what's going on? They'll give you like a receipt that says that
I don't
this was
think
the
so.
original price.
I don't know,
So
but I can just tell you what's on the website itself.
we've gotten quotes from 4 different companies and they don't list the price. Of
Yeah,
all
oh, no, they don't. No,
No, they give you the
no,
end price. but
right.
not-
So at this point in time, I'm gonna call up Bob Jeffries. He's has heat pumped in his home. Or has a heat pump installed, and he's gonna tell you about his experience with the whole system. I've only had mine since February, so. But one thing I can tell you, I can verify what he said is my home's much more comfortable than it ever was. Year round. It's quiet, it works great, much more comfortable than it used to be.
Does that rebate vary from system to system?
No, oh, well, if the whole home, so remember, I took out my gas furnace. I no longer have any other source other than the heat pump. Well, actually, I had them add in a backup resistive heater part in case, but in the one season I've had it, it hasn't kicked in. But to get that $10,000, you have to put in, you say you have no backup. The only backup in my case is the resistive heater. So go ahead.
Did everybody sign this on the top there?
We'll go for Bob. Okay. We actually did 2 houses and both of them are on Boston Road. They're both what's known as New England continuous style, which is probably the least efficient house form anywhere because it's so much perimeter. One of the houses has a 40-foot long by 13-foot wide 2-story addition, which when you look at it, they're tough buildings to handle. At 14, we have 2 units that do 4. It's a multi-split. They do 4 rooms each and handle 8 rooms. And there's 1 unit that handles just big kitchen area. And our experience with that is that 1 split is much more efficient than anything else. And thing the multi-splits do is they fight with each other. They don't all go at the same time.
That chair, so you have to sound better.
Is that better? So because these are old houses, the multi-split makes the most sense because each room can be done. At 14 Boston Road, they never had heat upstairs. And when we moved in, it didn't have heat upstairs. And when we did this conversion, we didn't have heat upstairs. Mostly depended upon overheating the house below and letting it rise up. And there were no pass-throughs, it just came up this 2 stairwells. There's a new baby in that house, so we had to do something to get heat into that. And so what we found was that the dedicated unit, I think it has up to a 30 SEER efficiency, which is notably higher than the multis. The multis are in the 18 range or so. So it's almost twice as efficient. on the air conditioning side. And we planned it out in that house. It all comes in the basement. Everything is fed up inside. There aren't these plastic chases that go up the side of the building and in. The other house is 11 Boston Road. And that house is notable for having a 9-inch crawl space. So there was no way to feed everything, and you'll see it's all on the outside. And it's okay, but I'd warn people, it's not exactly the best look for a house to see these. And they're a
Talk
good,
about mini splits
the mini splits have,
and the piping on the outside of the house.
and they cover it with a plastic chase, which is paintable, but still you can see them. They're on the outside of the house. And our experience in that house is we have two separate ones. One does 5 rooms, the other one does 4. And it's the same issue, that it's not quite as efficient. And you have to be careful how you stage what's happening, because especially on the 5-unit one, it'll have 2 or 3 of them going and the other ones are not. They're waiting because it can't supply everything at once. And it's just kind of something they don't necessarily talk about. You would think that it was continuous. So when you get really cold weather, and yeah, it's good down to 15 below, because these are all extreme low temperature heat pumps. It doesn't really keep up anymore, because you're down to almost at best 1 to 1. In fact, it can go below that. The other issue you get is when you count all of the rooms in old houses, there are a lot of rooms that aren't going to be heated. You're not going to put an individual unit in the bathrooms or other spaces. In our case, the small cellar area under 11 Boston Road has no heat, so we have to heat that in order to keep pipes from freezing as a separate thing.
Did you already insulate the heck out of the house before you put these in?
No.
Okay. Just wondering.
This is not my experience at all.
Well, that's another thing about them. Both of these houses were fully insulated, but they were not over insulated. Mass Save on the first one, on the 14 Boston Road, there was no requirement to have Mass Save come to get qualified for the rebate
At the time.
Although there was a fight with them to get them to admit that, yeah, we qualified even though we didn't have Mass Save come in. But there wasn't anything that could have been done in that house. They won't make you do extraordinary things. So the attic is a usable attic. It's completely insulated under the floorboards. So they're not going to make you insulate on top of that.
Just single pane windows or double pane?
One house has fully restored single pane with storms. The other house has the same notable deficiency. But it's an interesting thing. One of the issues I have with this whole thing, and by the way, I've been in an architecture business for years. We started doing conversions and new construction a good 10 to 12 years ago, doing heat pumps. They were much less efficient then, so we tended to oversize everything. We went to the max 125% of what you're supposed to do. These in 11 and 14 are right. They're whole house systems, but they're cut right to 100%. And I'll give you an example of that. We did in Brookline many years ago, we did a 9-story condominium building that has about 40 units in it. It had a hot water system already. And we said, leave the hot water system where it is. Don't take that out. And they did not do that. They took it out and then called us back about 8 years after the original installation, because they were having frozen pipes in their bathrooms. And the heating system was gone. We had to bring in a way of pumping heat into the corridors, and they had to leave doors open and all kinds of things to fix
So
that
in your
problem.
own house, you're semi-satisfied with the heat pump?
No, I'm more than satisfied
Okay,
because,
Tell.
well, I'm just, you wanted to hear issues. So. The 11 Boston Road, they did require Mass Save to come in, but they required that after the fact. It wasn't before. And in that case, Mass Save agreed with us that there wasn't anything you could do. It would be virtually impossible to insulate the 9-inch crawl space, so that's still open. And
so can you wrap it up? Because we gotta go to quick Q&A with our online as well.
Yes, there is.
There is?
Yeah. Me?
Oh, okay, I didn't know, I didn't know you were the person, so,
There were two more people.
I think there are
So
two more
keep
people.
going.
all right.
anyway, the reason I'm satisfied with it is the heating and cooling cost is actually less because we had an oil-fired steam system in 11 Boston Road. So we paid less and we also had cooling that we never had before. And this year that was really appreciated. 11 Boston Road didn't function quite that way. And we don't know exactly what the costs were because we never had heat upstairs before. So that was a plus. And the same thing, we didn't have cooling. And the difficulty I will warn you about is when you have multiple rooms and you have these enormous perimeters, it's a hard layout to do and it's hard to always meet it. When it gets down below 5 degrees, it really tends to struggle. So what we do is we have both central heating systems set to come on when the temperature gets down below a certain point. So when the system can't keep up anymore, it automatically switches itself over. Anyway, but
Thank you, Bob.
I'm Tim Belger. I live on Wayne Road, and our house was built in about 1970. And at the time, the range was all electric, so we had baseboard electric heat. We were told afterwards that, you know how you sometimes your vacuum cleaner cord is warm when you go to pick it up like that. If you strip the insulation off that and hold the vacuum cleaner cord up and run the vacuum, that's how you're heating your home with baseboard electric. It's the least efficient, not to mention incredibly expensive. Our bills were well over $1,000 a month during the winter time. Oh yeah, absolutely brutal. So I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years ago, we went to getting the splits. And at the same time, we put in solar panels. So I can't really tell you how much saving money we got from one or the other because they both came in at the same time. But I do know that we've had several months every year where the electric bill is 0. That's cool. And yeah, everything in the house is electric, and yet the bill was still 0, which is really cool. It's a split entry home, and the basement part is really impossible to heat. So we put a wood stove in like 40-odd years ago. We moved in there, and that takes care of that very nicely. It's an open area bit, so sending ductless splits everywhere throughout the house wasn't really efficient for us, and our kids had gone off by then. So we didn't need to heat every room in the house. So ours, the outside thing is on the south side of the house, and we get the pipes going up. We have 2 splits in the living and dining room and 1 split in the master bedroom. Absolutely perfect, tremendous. Saving is great. The heat, contrary to what he was saying, we find the heat very quick to come on. These last few nights, in fact, we get down to 40 at night, 45 at night outside. When we go to bed, we turn the heat on for like 10 minutes. Shut it off and go to sleep. It's fine. It's great. Just takes the chill off. It's wonderful. Air conditioning is great also for that. It works very well. We got our started with the Mass Save audit. They put in the insulation, they do the light bulb, they do the whole 9 yards. And at the time we got our ductless splits in fact the solar panels, we could get rebates from, not rebates, tax credits from both federal and the state. And a tremendous saving, a huge saving. $20,000 tax credit at least. For the 2 things combined, which is, you spread it out over several years, which is great. Yeah, the splits, then if you're seeing these splits around, but the vents, you can angle the vents, they're up by the ceiling area. You can point them down if you want the heat to come in that way. Just air conditioning, you can put it up top and have it drop down, which, you know, cold air sinks. And I will agree when it gets down below zero, which it doesn't do very often here anymore. It used to all the time. Those of you who lived in Westford for 40 years, I remember many in like 20-25 below zero. Haven't seen one of those in a long time. Probably won't either, but which, you know, which is good as far as the ductless splits go, because they don't work as well when it gets below zero. They work, but you can tell they're straining at their work. Maintenance, very easy maintenance on those. They have filters, which they sometimes don't tell you about, or I didn't read much about it, but I realized, yeah, I'm not getting as much heat as I should out of that. And I wonder, so I took it down, the filter was just covered. It's done. 5 minutes of vacuum, I did all the filters, all 3 units. Instant backup to the tremendous use is great. Oh, the outside lines, they're insulated, they're covered over the plastic thing like that, but they're also sort of vulnerable. At least ours was. I don't know if squirrels get into it or whatever like that. We had to get them not replaced, but recovered. After, you know, just last summer, we had to get that done. I'm glad we did before something bad happened. Yeah. Just to warn you, that kind of thing can happen if those lines are exposed.
So did you have the white part replaced? Is that what you're saying?
No, it was going into that white part from the from the big fan thing going into the white part. They didn't have it covered as well as they should have.
Okay.
Installer's fault or my fault for not knowing what to look for, I guess. We didn't have the nice free coaching at the time. Too long ago. But the biggest upside is the comfort. It's just so uniformly wonderful to have comfort. And in the back bedrooms, if you're only using the kids' room, they can use a baseboard electric. What do I care? They're only there for a week or two at a time. The whole rest of the house is done with the splits. It's absolutely wonderful, wonderful comfort.
Are you on the pump program? You know,
I don't remember to be, I don't think we are. I don't remember to be honest with you. All right, so I'll stop and.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your input. So at this point,
One more sign.
okay, sign, good.
Hello everyone, my name is Sai Rani. I've been a Westford resident for 8 years. I won't go over what has already been covered, right? We went through the same process. Tom stopped by the house, kickstarted the process, and we went through the approved vendors, the smart, the mass save, basically, right? The approved vendors with mass save, and we picked the vendor. Our neighbor Paul and Carol Morse, they went through the same process, so they had a preference for the vendor, and that vendor was part of the list, right? So we went through that. So what we have, at least the current setup is, it's an all electric house. We do not have gas. Everything is electric, and have a solar panels as well. So that kind of cuts down on the electric bill, and that pairs really well with the heat pump, which I found beneficial. So it made it very easy for me. It's a heat source, heat pump 3-ton system. As per Tom's recommendation, it's a 2,000, roughly 2,000 square foot home, right? So that kind of leaned me towards a 3-ton, and roughly the cost was, can we state the cost? How much?
Forced hot air?
Yes,
forced hot air
it's a
system?
central
Okay.
HVAC,
So
yeah.
it's just no mini splits. This was just a system
The whole
like
house,
I have,
the whole house.
which had forced hot air to begin with,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
So
right.
you just added that? Okay.
No. I mean,
Oh.
the unit that I got is a whole house heat pump system,
Okay.
not the mini splits.
Okay.
The ductwork was already in place,
That's
so it
what I
was
mean.
easy to just
Got it.
plug it in. The system that we got was Fujitsu, 3-ton system. Roughly the cost was 13,500. And the mass save, hopefully we should be getting the 10,000 back. That's a big amount.
Yeah.
Right. It is. And that is one of the reasons, like, we have the solar panels plus this rebate paid together, really it's cost beneficial. Even though I think one of the questions you asked was the propane, right? Not propane, but the natural gas. It's cheaper, yes, right? But because of the mass save, when you add it up, we came out ahead.
And think of the resale value eventually too.
Right, resale value. So I guess it's part of the green initiative, the full ecosystem. And we still have the baseboard heating as a backup, just in case the HVAC goes down. And within the HVAC itself, it's a variable speed system. And it's got the heating coil as the second stage. In case of the negative temperatures, that's helpful. Did I cover everything?
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
How quiet they are.
Oh, yeah, they're-
It's like, somebody told me it was whisper quiet.
Yep.
It's a real thing with sound. It is literally whisper quiet.
yeah.
So do we have any people, anybody in the room have questions for Tom?
Yeah, on the topic of white, so is even the outdoor unit white?
No, the outdoor unit you can hear,
Okay. Yeah.
but it's
I-
not obnoxious.
In my case, the outdoor unit, the only time I heard it make any noise was it goes through a defrost cycle if it's fairly cold outside. That I can hear a little bit. I've got it. It's outdoors, it's where my old air conditioning unit used to be. So it's about where our dining room is and our bedroom is about three doors down. So, but other than that, especially when it's on AC, you don't hear it at all. The fans are whisper quiet. Yeah, I can be standing next to it and I can hear a little bit of whoosh, but
Ours isn't.
very
it's
quiet.
Inside. You
Yeah.
don't hear the.
Great. That was a comment and here are the questions. Right, and that person's still there.
Running continuously or does it just?
It's on and off. And we've been on our back deck and there's a double right next to us and it's not.
The current technology heat pumps, it's a little bit confusing, but well, they throttle. You know, they can throttle down or throttle up depending on the demand on the system. And so they tend to run more continuously, but they throttle back when less is needed and throttle up when more is needed.
I'm assuming they don't work when there's power outage.
Got that right.
Yeah, well, neither does your furnace.
Hence the wood
Right.
stove. Right.
In my case, I have solar panels and backup batteries, so we had that power outage a while back. I didn't notice it.
So yours went all the way through.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a question about the temperature, right? When it's really cold.
Yeah.
So the reason why I went to Fujitsu was because of exactly that. I don't have a propane or oil heating as a backup. So Fujitsu is rated up to -15. I'll come to the front. So
Yeah.
-15 degrees. So that's the reason why I went with that. Bosch, I was told like, it's low teens, like 5 degrees. So it wouldn't really work for me, for my household. So it all depends on everybody's infrastructure, what you have, like, as a backup heat. Cost wise, Bosch was a little bit cheaper, but it wouldn't really help me in the long run.
So you didn't get a backup resistive heater like I did. You just have just the heat pump as your sole source.
Yeah,
correct?
and with
Okay.
a heating coil.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's what I've got, a heating coil as backup
As a
just in
second
case.
stage. Yeah,
Okay,
second
so we
stage.
have the same.
But still, even with the second stage, I think what Bosch said, they couldn't, when the outside temperature is the negative.
Yeah.
Negative double digits.
Yes.
It is not efficient at all. So it led me to Fujitsu, which is more rated towards like -15, up to -15.
In my case, Mitsubishi.
Mitsubishi, yeah.
Yeah, for the same reason.
We also have 2 comments or questions online.
I got a bunch.
Okay.
Okay.
So anybody else? Go ahead.
When NASA does its work, they talk to you about ventilation.
Officially, no. We're probably going there. The question is about ventilation air, makeup air, because as we make the homes very, very tight, then you can get into other issues. And net zero or passive house standards that are very shortly down the road are going to require heat exchangers to be able to exchange air from the outside and the inside without losing the heat or the cooling in the summer in order to avoid some of those problems. But that's not within Matt Save's current portfolio.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, people talk about, sometimes the efficiency with the heat or less on lower temperatures. Have you noticed for the air conditioning, the other extreme, if it's 90 or above, are you having similar issues or no?
No, no, works perfectly.
I, in all this, at least for me, in this, we had it on most of those really warm days. Very comfortable inside. I didn't notice, any extremes, like I had it set at, I think 75. And it stayed at 75. To
Same
me,
here.
that was comfortable.
Same here.
That was through every extreme we had of this past summer.
Like I noticed this about reducing the, what was it called?
Trim the peak.
Trim the peak. We turned ours up to 78 from 4 p.m. until 8 p.m. Use less electricity for the whole content.
So that's what I was gonna ask, but maybe I should ask, what do you keep your temperature at the heat in the winter?
I keep mine at 68. The question was, what do we keep our temperatures at in the winter? And for me, I use 68, and that's comfortable for us. And I notice I have a room, an addition, and that used to be, before I put in the heat pump, that used to be about 3 degrees cooler with our old heating system. And now it's the same temperature as the rest of the house, because I've got the heat pump set not only at 68, but I leave it on auto fan, so the air is constantly circulating, which I didn't have that option with my old system. So it works well.
Because the heat rises, it gets too hot. We really turn on stuff on the.
But I think we didn't know that we were the electric bill. And it was always more high. It's going to go up. It's going to not,
Should check that online.
I will note that the electric bill is gonna go up. For example, when we converted, our electric bill went up by about 60%. But in true engineering fashion, you want to change one thing at a time, assess the results, and then change something else. And we didn't do that. We bought an EV, we put in the heat pumps, and we bought an induction stove.
And we never used any oil.
Correct.
It's a negative.
So we have 3 years of experience now with the system, and our electric bills have consistently run higher. But the total heating cost, the total energy home cost of the home is down 32%. And a big part of the additional electric is our EV. A quarter of the electric power that we bring into our house goes through the wire and into our car, which is nice, but it's.
But how can you tell which is EV and which is
Because I installed an Emporia home energy monitor system that measures circuit by circuit how much power is consumed by each of these.
Never ask an engineer.
The other way too is.
Excuse me, Bob, she was before you, so go ahead with your question.
I was just hoping that you could talk a little bit to the availability of contractors. Two things and specifically differentiate between ground source and air source. Because when I looked into ground source several years ago, I couldn't find anybody that would even pick up the phone. I had a very hard time. But also I wonder, with all of the difficult, the very hot summer that we've had, if we're, if they're just getting a lot more business and if it's hard to get vendors to come. So I guess if you have insight to be sort or.
Yes, there is some of that.
Do you want to
And-
can you repeat some of the
Oh, yeah,
questions?
the question is about getting vendors.
This
Are
is
they
for
available at
ground
all,
source.
and how responsive are they? We do have 2 on our list of, these are vendors that we have experience with, that we know work in our area. We don't endorse particular vendors, but we do have 2, and they have been responsive on ground source. They're both very good. The tall pole in the tent is getting somebody to come and drill the bores. And there aren't any more drilling companies than there have been, and so that's the hard part of the ground source. But none of my current clients are reporting difficulties with getting installers. to be responsive, to come out and give quotes, to give responsive quotes to the systems that you're talking about.
And then installation after the books.
Yeah, but it's not fast, you know, and they used to say supply chain, supply chain. Now they just say, well, that's what it takes. Yeah, but again, it's about a 4-month process is what I'm observing.
Bob?
Yeah, it was a question about the EV, because we have an EV too, that it tells us exactly how much power it uses, so we can subtract it out of the.
Yeah, ours does as well, but I couldn't confidently say, yeah, our refrigerator really does suck. Before, and now I can, see. So the biggest users in our home, the EV is number 1, the 2 heat pumps are number 2, combined are number 2. Domestic hot water is big for us because, well, I haven't cracked how to put a 2023 heat pump water heater in a 1700 hand dug cellar. I haven't figured that out yet. So that's big, but lots of other stuff is very small. You know what really surprised me, and one of my Heat Smart colleagues told me about this, but coming in at 3% of our total electric power consumption is our DVR.
I want to take some questions and comments from online. There's one, this is from someone who, let's see. This is from Bruce. He says, I was just asked to pay the whole balance for insulation by a Mass Save approved contractor, very irregular. Now, I don't know what to tell him to call Mass Save back or.
I haven't had that experience, or my clients haven't had that experience, but the contractor is within their rights to ask for payment of the system. And when the check comes in, then you can celebrate. But they're within their rights to ask for the full cost.
Yeah, I had to pay mine.
That being at all common.
Question, what maintenance is needed for the indoor wall units? Does the heat pump water heater hook up to the same outdoor unit as the indoor wall units?
I'll answer those questions one at a time. Inside maintenance, as Tim suggested.
Take the screens out of that.
A, know that the filters are in there. Open it up, pull them out, vacuum, and put them back in. That's it.
Piece of cake.
As far as a heat pump water heater, those are self-contained. So the heat pump is built right on top of the water heater. It's completely separate from the heat pump system that you may have for heating and cooling of your home. And can be done at a separate time.
And believe it or not, that is the end of questions online. Anybody else in here have a question for Tom? Go ahead, sir.
Is it possible to find out how much rebate you would be eligible for before you commit to going this path?
If you sign up for heat pump coaching, that's part of the package.
Okay.
Can you sign up online? Because we have 4 quotes that we would like help decide.
Don't let them out of the room.
I'd be delighted to do that, and the official way of doing it, the unofficial way is everybody knows Emily's email.
This is true.
The official way of doing it is go on to heatsmartalliance.org, and there on one of the top pages is request a coach. And you'll fill in a basic amount of information, and if you put in that you live in Westford, our track system will send you to me.
I want to do that.
Yes, sir.
So I think you had said that the rebates were contingent upon you taking out your fossil fuel system. Is that true?
No, that's not true, but it is a little fluid right now. Mass Save is obviously going through some steps to try to cut down on corruption. there has been in the rebate system. And so they've recently implemented some changes to address that. Now, one thing that it says is if you choose to retain your fossil fuel system and you have a whole home setup, then you must disconnect the fossil fuel system. What does that mean? No one knows. Well, but
We don't ever use it.
that didn't apply to us. And so, but there needs to be some clear, up until about, only 8 months ago, all you had to do was sign an affidavit that said, I'm retaining the fossil fuel system as an emergency backup.
Yeah.
And that was it. But now you have to disconnect. And
you can bring somebody in to reconnect afterwards.
well, we've asked the question explicitly to our contact at Mass Save, who is a pretty senior person, and says, does that mean like pull the breaker? Does that mean take a chainsaw to it? What are we talking about here? And the answer so far is we'll get back to you on that. Now, the other thing is that they're also adding another layer of complexity. Part of the coaching process is we will give you an estimate of the heating load on your home based on the fuel costs that you had before that. Unless you're somebody poor like Cy who didn't have oil or gas bills to do, we couldn't perform that service, but we will look at how much fuel you've used to keep your home warm in the last couple of years, and we'll be able to make an accurate estimate of what the heating load at the design temperature, which is on our neighborhood, 7.7 degrees Fahrenheit, on your home as a sort of as a staying even, so that you can assess the flows.
Yes.
Whether they're proposing a system that's way too big or way too small.
The thing that I have is I have an old boiler that's probably about a 77 gas water boiler. And then the rebates for that efficiency is gonna go away at the end of the year. So I'm trying to decide whether I go with a gas, higher efficiency boiler that's natural gas, or do I go with heat pumps? So it seems.
You know what our answer is?
So,
Heat pump.
Yeah.
but that's not what your graph said. Your graph said I'd spend less money if I had the high efficiency boiler.
Right now, and future, we don't know what the future experience is going to be, and it doesn't account for, solar, for example, on your roof, or we participate in community solar.
Right.
So right now, National Grid owes us $2,200, which is a good thing, because of how we source our power right now. But you don't know what's going to happen in the future, and quite honestly, I fully expect that National Grid support of any rebates for gas appliances are going to go away. Perhaps as soon as
they've already said it.
Yeah, but whether you can get a system in
that amount of time,
but the heat pumps we know will, those will, and the IRA also awards additional money for those.
So I have a question about that. Do they still have integrated components?
The integrated control thing has been replaced by the disconnect. When we put our system in, we had to have integrated controls so that the heat pump system also controlled the oil furnace.
Right.
And you set a crossover temperature, and we set our crossover temperature from down to, we're never going to get there. And that was what was required at that time. It's a more rigorous and still being defined process at this point. They're not being jerks about it in terms of people who are coming up for the rebate at this point. But they're gonna get stiffer.
So I want to thank everybody for coming. I hope you learned a few things at this seminar, and again, thanks for coming. So